Introverts are not failed extroverts. And that sentence, as obvious as it sounds when stated directly, contradicts the operating assumption of virtually every school, every workplace, every social structure, and every cultural narrative that the majority of the modern world has built around the idea that the ideal human being is gregarious, verbally expressive, comfortable in groups, energized by social interaction, and perpetually available for the kind of spontaneous, high stimulation, externally oriented engagement that extroverted culture has decided is the baseline of normal human functioning. Which means that the introvert, the person who is none of those things, not because something went wrong in their development, but because something went differently in their neurology, has spent a significant portion of their life being measured against a standard that was never designed to include them, being told in 100 subtle and not so subtle ways that their natural way of being in the world is a problem to be corrected rather than a variation to be understood. And today, we are going to correct that misunderstanding completely with the neuroscience and psychology that explains not just what introverts are, but why they are different at the most fundamental biological level, and why that difference, properly understood, is not a deficit, but a distinct and genuinely valuable cognitive architecture that the world has been systematically underestimating for as long as it has been systematically misreading. The neurological difference between introverts and extroverts is not a matter of personality preference in the soft cultural sense. It is a matter of brain chemistry and nervous system sensitivity that has been documented with increasing precision since psychologist Hans Eysenck first proposed the arousal theory of introversion in the 1960s, and that subsequent neuroscience research has substantially confirmed and refined. The introvert's brain operates with a higher baseline level of cortical arousal than the extrovert's. It is, in its resting state, more internally stimulated, more sensitive to incoming sensory and social information, and more quickly overwhelmed by the level of external stimulation that the extrovert's less sensitive system requires to feel adequately engaged with the world. This is why social interaction depletes the introvert while it energizes the extrovert. Not because the introvert dislikes people or finds connection less meaningful, but because every unit of social stimulation costs the introvert's already highly aroused nervous system more than it costs the extrovert's, which means the introvert reaches the point of cognitive and emotional overload faster, requires more recovery time afterward, and finds the sustained social performance that most modern environments demand genuinely, physically exhausting in a way that the extrovert, whose nervous system is seeking rather than managing stimulation, simply does not. Research by neuroscientist Sophia Dembling and psychologist Marty Olson-Laney further establishes that introverts and extroverts process dopamine, the brain's primary reward chemical, differently, with introverts being more sensitive to dopamine stimulation and therefore requiring less of it to feel adequately rewarded, which means the introvert finds sufficient neurochemical satisfaction in the quieter, more internally generated pleasures of reading, deep thinking, meaningful one-on-one conversation, and creative solitary work that the extrovert's less sensitive dopamine system would find insufficiently stimulating. And that the introvert's preference for these activities is not a social avoidance strategy, but the neurochemically rational behavior of a brain that is getting exactly the reward it needs from sources that happen to be less socially visible than the sources the extrovert requires. And here is the final truth about why introverts are different. The truth that reframes the entire conversation from deficit to distinction, and that the psychology of introversion keeps arriving at from every research direction simultaneously. Introverts are different not because their social needs are smaller, but because their inner world is larger, because the same neural sensitivity that makes them more easily overwhelmed by external stimulation also makes them more attuned to the internal landscape of thought, emotion, and imagination, more capable of the sustained, deep, self-directed cognitive engagement that produces the specific quality of insight, creativity, and intellectual depth that the world's most extraordinary thinkers, artists, writers, and innovators have demonstrated across every domain and every era of human achievement, and that the introvert's difference from the extroverted norm is not the story of a person who cannot keep up with the world. It is the story of a person whose world extends further inward than most people's eyes can follow. Subscribe for more mind secrets.